Thanks for joining us. We're going to take a few minutes and talk about humility. Humility is the idea and the realization that we can recognize our own value or our own importance and the role that we actually play in the world. It's a calling that Christ has called us to as Christians, and we often maybe think of that. We may remind ourselves to, quote unquote, be humble. We may tell ourselves to live in humility. But to actually embrace that, to actually engage that, may require something in our lives that we're not presently aware of or attuned to. So over the next couple weeks, we're going to be talking about humility. I'm going to use as a large basis for what I speak about this book by Hannah Anderson entitled Humble Roots. It has blessed me greatly. I have read it more than one time, and I've picked it up at different times to look for reminders in it as she was teaching and showing through Scripture what God has called us into. One of the things that happens in humility is this, and one of the ways that we may recognize our need for it is the realization of the amount of time that we spend worrying about what we might later consider little things. Do we have milk in the fridge for tomorrow morning? Is our grass going to be cut before the company arrives? Did we remember to respond to that email? Did we remember to respond to that invitation? And certainly these things can add up and they can certainly feel big, but oftentimes we would probably admit that a lot of the effort and energy that we put into worry comes from things that we would later regard as small. Why is that? Well, Hannah Anderson points out, and I think it's a really challenging thought for us, and it is this, that when these little things begin to compound in our minds, when we begin to consider them, when we begin to worry over them, that they bring us to the idea that we may have failed, or even worse, that we might be considered a failure. And now that is not a small thing. It might be a small thing that there's no milk in the fridge for tomorrow morning, and we might get over that within a few hours. But to consider ourselves a failure that we didn't provide, that we forgot, that we got too distracted, now that is a whole other deal. And it's a whole other reality for us. And because of that, it reminds us of our own frailty, of our own weakness, of our own lack of strength, of our own sometimes inability to perform. And because of that, that can be a really, well, it can make us feel like we have no power. It can make us feel, if you will, imprisoned. And Jesus actually addresses this, and he reminds us of something, and he reminds us of it in the midst of his teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. He's teaching how to pray, and he's teaching about what it means to live in the presence of God, and he says right in the middle of it, oh, and by the way, don't worry about the things that you have to do every day. Now, that doesn't mean we don't care about them. It doesn't mean they aren't things that we should give attention to, but don't become obsessive over them. And then he points out something. He said, don't the lilies of the field have their own clothing? And they don't actually clothe themselves. Let me read that to you. It says this, why do you worry about your clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. You could argue that the entire purpose of a flower is to be beautiful. And God's reminder is that it doesn't even do that in and of itself. God does that for them. And that's the calling that he has for us. And so the rule of the job, the position for the lilies of the field is to beautify the world, and yet they don't even dress themselves. God does that. This reassurance will remind us that we have a role, and God is the one who is at work in bringing that role to fruition and bringing it about in our lives. He doesn't scold us for that. He doesn't tell us that you're idiots for thinking about this. He just says, you can think about this all you want, and you're not going to add any one moment to your life. In other words, trust me, live what I've given you, trust in my faithfulness. Humility keeps us away from the obsession with failure and puts us in a position where we trust God's handiwork being present in our lives. God bless you. I'll see you next time.